you so much, everyone. Well, our attention is on tax issues. If you have tax problems, so you better get your seat here. I don't think there is anyone in this country that shouldn't be talking about tax, especially when this government says it wants to focus on that. But the burden of fixing the economy and how to fix it may majorly not be the problem of President Bola Tinubu. Is on him, though, yes, because he carries that burden to be able to fix the economy and security, among several other issues in the country. But there are certain persons and some group of individuals who are also expected to deliver on their duties to revive the ailing economy. One of them is the chairman of the Presidential Taskforce on Fiscal Policy and Tax Reforms Committee, Taiwo Oyedele, who came with a lot of confidence in him when he was appointed into that role. Taiwo Oyedele joins us live here in our Abuja studio tonight. Thanks so much, Mr. Oyedele, for joining us tonight.
Thank you, my brother, for having me.
It's getting close to a year since your committee has been set up by the president, and there were gaps. That's what this government says. There was a major problem within the tax corridor. And part of it was the realization when this government got into office that there was a revenue problem. We're not producing. We have issues, gaps in the tax corridor. But since you got into office, your tenure was supposed to be 9 months or more than
1 year.
Well, it was supposed to be 1 year. But over the time that you're being in office, what have you found out?
Thank you very much. So you're right. I think we have significant issues with our tax revenue. We have issues with revenue generally, which means tax and non-tax. But even bigger than that is the whole fiscal system. Almost at a stage you could describe as a crisis. So when my committee was set up, we had three broad mandates. The first one was to look at fiscal governance. And that's really about our finances as a country, our spending, our borrowing, coordination of policies within the federal government, but also across subnational, as well as respect for fiscal thresholds. The second one is around revenue transformation. Like you mentioned, the revenue profile of the country is abysmally low, such that if you decide to dedicate all of our revenues to just fixing roads and other forms of transportation, it will be insufficient to cover that. In fact, for 2024, our entire budget for the federal government, despite the amendment to the Appropriation Act, comes to about 35 trillion for the federal government. For all the states combined, it's about 15.9 trillion. So put it together, you have about 54. In dollar terms, that's just about $32 billion. It's the size of the budget of Kenya, equally a poor country with less than 1/4 of our population. So it was a revenue crisis. So revenue transformation for us meant we can no longer continue to celebrate incremental progress because the base was just so small. And for us, it wasn't about raising taxes from existing taxpayers. In fact, one of the things we found out was that it's mostly the poor people in Nigeria who have been paying taxes. So it's time for them to take a break, which means we have to look at the system again to take that burden away from the vulnerable people, small businesses, and let the middle class, the elite, and people who can afford pay in line with the principle of progressivity when it comes to taxation. We also beaming our searchlights on government assets, including real property. They're all over the place. Some of them, we don't even know where they are. So the Ministry of Finance Incorporated, we're working with them. They are working on an asset register. We're also looking at government-owned enterprises as another way of generating revenue, as well as mineral resources beyond oil and gas. And the third and last component of our work is on economic growth, facilitation, and competitiveness. So this is the principle that says the best way to generate revenue on a sustainable basis is to grow your economy. When businesses grow and individuals prosper, you take a share of their prosperity by way of taxes. There was a year that Elon Musk alone, I think it was 2021, paid $11 billion in taxes. I'm not sure it's because he loved the US. After all, he's originally South African, but because the US gave him the platform to prosper, and just fair and proper to then pay a share of your revenue to such a government. So those are the broad mandates in terms of the coverage of our work. We have been quite busy. For the past 1 year, we have membership cutting across all walks of life. We've drafted new laws for the tax system. We think we should not be amending our tax laws anymore. They're just too old, not fit for purpose. We've drafted brand new laws for all the major taxes. We're just waiting for Mr. President to return to get the final approval. And then once the lawmakers resume from their recess, we'll be ready to present it to them. We've done a number of executive orders, had regulations, directives. So we have made some progress. But as you imagine, many Nigerians, including myself, we want these things done like yesterday.
So we will get into the nitty-gritty of some of these issues. There are those who are afraid of the possible increase in VAT. There are those who are also wondering, where are the middle class you're talking about? Because there's an erosion of that class. There are those who will say, well, we have huge population of the poor and just a minute of the very rich in Nigeria. And so when you're talking about any economy that will be revived, it has to rely more on the middle class and the micro and medium enterprises that will also help the economy grow. But yeah, if you look at it in the Nigerian context, those are the factors that you don't find at all. Those denominators are absolutely absent. And those problems inherent in our tax corridor caste system in Nigeria, including multiplicity of taxation, issue of lack of database, issue of touting of tax collections. A lot of issues are there, but we'll get into it one after the other. So I'm interested in those laws that you have identified. First and foremost, let's start with them. Which of the major laws have you been able to identify? So you're looking more of a revolution now because as far as you are concerned and your committee, our tax laws are outdated and moribund, and you want brand new tax laws. Is that it?
That is correct.
So the major ones are, you're now ready for a draft.
Yes.
Which ones do you have?
Yes. So I like the way you've put it. So we want a revolution because that's what we need. So we look at three very important components of the fiscal system. The first one being the fiscal policy. So we have drafted now, we've had a lot of engagement, including Nigerians in diaspora, people with disability. We've done all of that. We have a brand new national fiscal policy, also just waiting for Mr. President to sign. We think that sets the framework for where we want to be, where we want to go, what we want to do, what we want to stop doing as a country. Then next to that are the tax law. So we've identified companies income tax, personal income tax, value-added tax, stamp duties, capital gains tax, excise taxes, about 6 or 7, all the major taxes, and we have redrafted new ones. Again, we've had a lot of engagement. So we're just waiting for the final stages of getting it to the National Assembly. And hopefully, our expectation is that we'll be able to get it out of the National Assembly within 1.5 months. Because we've done a lot of the engagements already.
And these are going to be the federal laws.
They'll be national.
Yeah, I mean, most of the tax laws are
mostly at the center.
At the center.
Yes.
Yeah, but the state also have, and state and local government, because they have also their deductions that they do at those levels. At the state and the local government, they have their own taxation policies. But so your committee is committed to the federal tax laws and in wanting to change them. Is that right?
And the state and local governments.
But you make recommendations because your committee does not have oversight or does not have a responsibility to the state, and because you are not appointed by the state. It's only President Tinubu that you are accountable to, and President Tinubu is a president of the Federal Republic. The states have their own local tax laws.
Yeah, good point. Let me explain what we did. After we were inaugurated, in fact, the very first thing we did was we identified that we cannot be successful if we focus only on the federal government. So we went to and the vice president was very helpful. We went to NEC, National Economic Council, and we presented ourselves to them, our mandate, and we requested that they should adopt our committee, which they did. So I can actually say to you that our committee is a national committee. And we've also identified laws at the state level and local government level that we need to harmonize. In fact, the biggest issue with multiplicity of taxes is at the local government level. They collect taxes on everything: haulage, bicycle, wheelbarrow, produce tax. So the laws I mentioned to you earlier on are the major ones, and they cut across. There are those that are peculiar to states, like property taxes. And then you also have local governments. But the major instrument that they use in collecting those taxes, over 20 at the local government level, is a law they call Approved Levies and Taxes Collection List. It has over 60 different taxes. Now, what we've done is compress all of that to 8. So some of those laws, to make it happen, even though we're engaging with everyone, including the local government, are things that need to go into the Constitution. And we've sent to the National Assembly already 10 amendment bills. Because once you address the problem from the Constitution, you solve the problem almost permanently. So this is not just about federal government. It's going to cut across.
So will CAMA be largely affected? Because all what you have mentioned, there are, when you talk company tax, corporate taxes, those have a direct correlation to CAMA, the Company and Allied Matters Act, which was recently, I think the latest being 2015, isn't it?
No, 2020.
2020, yes. As amended. That is also going to be affected, isn't it? Because if you are making substantial adjustment to all of the existing laws, CAMA too might be affected, isn't it?
Not substantially, because really CAMA is just about company regulation, right? To register, regulate yourself, what kind of business do you want to run? Is it limited partnership? Is it incorporated trustees? So what we've done is make sure that our policies in terms of taxation complement what we have in CAMA. So you don't have to comply. For example, if you are a small company under CAMA and it's defined in a particular way, and we say we want to exempt small companies from paying taxes, we should ensure that the definition of what's small is consistent. So you are not confused when you are small under one law and you're not small under another one.
The reason why I'm asking that, Mr. Oyedele, is because all of these laws have a handshake.
Yes.
If the root of some of the principles or the rules that guide the operation of these and their own responsibility to the federal government or the authorities as captured by the different laws, if major of those things are changed, it's going to affect some of these rules. That's why I'm asking. And CAMA will tell you what needs to be done as to your responsibility to the agencies and which agencies of government you have to pay these levies to, and which are. So I'm wondering how this is also going to play out. But you're focused on the major tax laws, which you said you have a draft, and that's going to be changed. And what a lot of Nigerians who are watching tonight might be bothered about, when you mention property tax, is also rates on rents. And those tenants and landlords, there's always a problem. I remember during the Fashola days in Lagos, there are propositions as to how the relationship between a landlord and a tenant will relate. And in other climes, and I know that you probably are borrowing some lessons on some templates or models from other federal states.
Yes.
And we will go into some of the information that they're provided for us so that Nigerians can see what you have on your mind. But for those, it's a difficult time in the country right now. And there is hardship in the land. And people wonder, how are you going to be able to pay your rent in this kind of economy? And you see a whole lot of payment tied to the rent. The agency, this, the that, and you paid. And there are those who are proposing that pay rent monthly. Pay rent in other climes. It can allow you to pay your rent every 2 weeks or every month. So are those all being put into context also in relation to what you are planning?
Yeah, the answer is yes. So as much as we do not believe in and we have not recommended that government should regulate rent, because you may solve one problem and create a bigger one. what we have taken into account is what are those basic necessities of life? Food, of course, accommodation, which means you have to pay rent if you don't have a house of your own. There's transportation, and then you have education and health. We've deliberately identified those items, and we've removed almost completely all the taxes applicable on them, including no VAT. We've also developed some proposals where government can give relief to private sector employers who provide transportation relief to their workers. Also, we've had a proposal around more employment. So if an employer employs more people than they would normally do, maybe average of past 3 years, they get some relief. So that's meant to stimulate employment generation. So we think that from the fiscal policy and tax perspective, we can make it at least more affordable for the Nigerian people to be able to afford those basic necessities. Shared passenger transportation is completely tax-free. But if you hire a taxi, so we assume that you're not the poorest Nigerian, then you have to pay the tax. Whereas if you get into a bus, like people in Lagos getting into Danfo and Molue, that would be completely tax-free. So that's what we've done so far regarding that particular issue.
What about tax refunds? Have you, that policy seemed to be non-existent in this climb. Yes. Is that also think about?
Yes. It's in the books. Haven't been implemented. In fact, I said many times at our committee meetings that I spent over 20 years in the private sector and I only got refund once. And this wasn't because there were no refunds, they were just not forthcoming. So in the laws we've drafted, we've put new rules there. One is to allow you use a refund relating to one particular tax area to pay taxes in the other areas. So you can ask for a refund, you can use it elsewhere. And when it comes to things like VAT, which is the area where you tend to have a lot of refund, we've included in the law for the government to pay you your refund within 30 or 60 days without any audit. So they should pay you first before they find out whether you are honest or not, because we are not running anywhere, by the way. So we expect that refunds will be a lot easier. The other thing we have done also is to identify what's the reason for the refund we normally have. We identify that in some cases, something like withholding tax, you are rendering services and government says, when I'm paying you for your services, I should retain a percentage and pay it over to the government on your behalf, pending when you file your returns at the end of the year. But the rates are so high, such that the amount I'm retaining and giving to government can actually be more than the tax you need to pay. Then you have to go to the government and say, Taiwo deducted 1 million on me, but my tax is actually 300. Can I have the 700,000 naira back? And that can take you 5 to 10 years. So we've now reduced those rates so that you only have a balance to pay to the government rather than having a refund due from the government. And we've exempted small businesses
from tax,
from those withholding taxes. Okay, no VAT, tax. Almost all the taxes, no VAT, no withholding tax, no company's income tax. The employees are exempted from personal income tax.
What is the definition of small business in the context of Nigeria?
So the context of the law we have as we speak now is 25 million turnover a year. But in our proposals, the laws we are passing to the National Assembly in the next few days or weeks, we've proposed that to go up to 50 million. So if your annual turnover, yes, if your annual turnover is 50 million or less, then you don't have to worry about all these taxes. And that, from our analysis, will cover around 97% of small businesses. And it goes back to your question and the issue you raised before, which is, where are these middle-class people? Our analysis shows that there are not many, but it would also not be right to say it's zero. So we think in the informal sector, from the data we had and analyzed, vis-a-vis the cost of living in Nigeria, average household family size, and all of those things, we identified that the top 3% of the informal sector and small businesses can afford to pay some taxes. And of course, the middle class, not a lot of numbers, but we have a good number of elites, including politicians. Because tax doesn't ask you where you generate your revenue from. You have revenue and wealth, you need to pay the taxes. You mentioned property tax earlier on. And indeed, you are right. We've looked at so many countries around the world because we want to make this reform something that not only solves the problems we have, but something that can be a reference point for generations to come and for other countries to learn from. So we have been very intentional in the way we've approached the work. So we looked at so many countries, and we found one of the countries quite interesting was Colombia. So there was a guy who is in charge of property tax in the city of Bogota. And we got into extensive analysis. And they were able to reform the property sector land reform. For us, it's not just, in fact, the property tax is a consequence of land reform and redevelopment, which is what can open up economic activities. The guy said that the property register for that city is $178 billion. And they collect over $1 billion in property tax in a year. Over $1 billion is about 1.6 trillion. Lagos State has never even collected, I think they just collected 100 billion last year.
In property tax.
In property tax, highest they've collected. So you can imagine Lagos is at least more than twice the size of Bogota.
So Lagos has a deficit.
Significant, maybe I would say opportunities rather than deficit. Yeah. Lagos, and it's not only Lagos, Lagos is just a good example to use. They have significant opportunity to generate revenue. There are about 4 million properties in Lagos. And our view is that you can design your policy to actually exempt 3 million. And I can tell you the top 1 million houses, properties in Lagos are not the poorest people. And that alone can give you these numbers we're talking about. And then the interesting part is our proposal says, when you generate that revenue, you must find a way to channel it back to those communities so that the quality of life would also improve.
Just a moment. Let me pause you for a moment.
Yes.
Yeah. Would you be increasing or proposing increase in VAT? Don't answer yet. Have you created an environment for a proper database? Don't answer yet. There is hardship in the land and people are paying tax on food that is difficult to come by. Have you adjusted and reformed that sector? Don't answer yet. But these are areas that I would like you to give us insight into what you have drafted, and we'll see some of the information you have provided tonight. But that's going to be after we return from this break, everyone. We'll be right back. Thank you so much, everyone, for staying with us. Taiwo Oyedele is the chairman of the Special Committee on Tax Reforms as put together by President Bola Tinubu's administration, and is here tonight with us on the program talking about the Tinubu tax agenda. Thank you so much, Mr. Oyedele, for your time tonight. I mean, the very nagging question about the value-added tax, which a lot of people will say it will affect the bottom line. But also, you look at it, it does look like there is some collection successes. And you see the increase, according to the NBS figures, which shown that there is a dramatic increase. We jumped to over $1 trillion. I think it's in the first quarter from this about 19.21% to over 1.43 trillion. And yet there are proposition of an increase from 7.5% to 10%. But when is that going to happen? Is it going to happen and when?
Okay, let me start by saying, to answer the question you asked about, would VAT rates go up? And I'll say is yes and no, and I would explain.
Okay.
So we identified
the yes part, which is the sad news. So the no part.
It's actually all good news. Okay. Even the yes part.
No, for those who are going to pay it anyway.
Even that is good news, and I will explain.
Okay, go ahead.
So what we found was that not just the tax system, even the VAT system was placing too much burden on the poorest people. For example, you had food items. Some of them were exempt, and without sounding technical, when you see an item is exempt from VAT, it means that any VAT you incur before the final stage, you have to bear it. Whereas if you say it's zero rated, all VAT from the beginning of that process to the end is taken out. So we've decided that food should not just be exempt, it should be zero rated. So that means food...
Processed food or...
is mostly basic food items. Some of them will be semi-processed, some of them will be raw food. But of course, if you go to a 5-star hotel to buy food, that's not part of what we cover.
Okay, so what about a restaurant?
A restaurant now depends. If you go to a restaurant where they're selling 50 million naira or less a year, you won't have to pay VAT. Okay. You know, the way we've done it is, and this is also good in promoting those small businesses. So a small business, whatever it is that they are selling, they won't have to charge VAT. And that's where the majority of Nigerian people will patronize. They don't go to Transcorp to go and have dinner, right? So food, the answer is that the rate will come down. The other thing is...
So let's get it clear.
Yes.
So if you go to the very big restaurant that make a lot of money,
or anyone that is selling more than
50 million per annum in turnover.
In turnover.
So you may not be able, you may not in the window that you are creating.
Yes.
Not now.
Not now.
VAT still exists in most of wherever.
That's correct.
Whether turnover is more than 15 or 50 million per annum. So if you go to the big ones that are making more than 50 million in turnover per annum, you will not be paying tax VAT on them in the nearest future.
Yeah, let me clarify. So currently, that's already applicable on 25 million a year.
Okay.
So if you go to a restaurant that is
small restaurant that's not making less,
there will be no VAT at all. So we're raising that to 50 million, right? So in addition to that, when you buy raw food, it doesn't matter where you buy it, whether you buy 1 billion worth of rice or beans, you still will not pay the VAT.
Okay, raw food.
Raw food, yeah. And then the ones that are semi-processed, like maybe gari, bread. You know, bread is processed, but you won't pay VAT on that.
No matter which supermarket
it doesn't matter where you buy it.
Okay.
But if you go to a 5-star hotel and you ask for sandwich, right? When they send you the invoice, you have to pay the VAT. Because we think you are one of the privileged Nigerians that can contribute a little bit into the purse. So which means you can say for 90-something% of Nigerians, they'll see their bill on food, all things being equal, will go down. The other one, which is the same principle, applies to education, whether it's primary, secondary, tertiary.
Private institutions.
Including private institutions, because education is education. And then same thing for health, as well as transportation, as well as housing, no VAT on rent. So, and if you think about what I've just said, and I'm going to tell you a bit more, you see that we've been intentional in protecting the Nigerian people. We also found that businesses had to incur a lot of VAT on their business assets. So like you build this studio, for example, this is for business. Whatever the VAT rate is, you bear that. We think that's not the right thing. We saw over 100 countries around the world where that is not the case. So our proposal also says you get the VAT back. The same thing if a business procures services, today they have to bear the VAT, they're going to be getting it back. What's the concept? The concept is if the cost of doing business comes down, then you not only have more businesses, but they also pass it on to their customers by way of lower prices. So those things are the ones where the VAT will come down.
But when will the 10% begin?
Yeah, no, then everything else, the VAT will go up, right? So, and the law we are proposing to the National Assembly, we have the rate of 7.5% moving to 10%. From 2025, depending on how soon they're able to pass the law. And then subsequent increases are also indicated in terms of the year they will kick in.
Right.
So, and while we are doing that, we also have corresponding reductions in personal income tax. So if anybody is earning about 2 million naira a month or less, they'll see 1.5 million naira a month or less, you'll see their personal income tax come down. Companies, we have their companies' income tax rates come down from 30% over the next 2 years to 25%. That's significant reduction. And then other taxes that they pay, there are quite many. Education tax, NASED, that's for engineering, IT levy, police tax, all those ones, we are consolidating it into a single one. They'll pay 4% initially, and that will go down to 2% over the next few years. So
by the dependent if these laws come into effect.
Exactly.
Now, let me ask you, what about tax holidays?
Yes.
That's not a very popular thing too in this climate.
Yes, it's not very popular. So we looked at it and said we needed to do it differently. So if our laws pass, there'll be nothing called pioneer status anymore. In place of that, we've introduced what we call priority sector incentives. So government will identify different sectors with different conditions of minimum investment, how long you can have the incentive for. And that work has also been finalized, waiting for us to move on to the National Assembly. So I'll say we have a reform incentive system that is not prone to abuse, where you can see the real benefit to the economy, where you can measure the cost to the government, and where there's transparency in terms of eligibility without a lot of discretion and subjectivity.
So what you are proposing is increase to 10%, not 15%, or you're looking at incremental.
So to get to, based on our proposal, to get to 15% by 2030. So, but the immediate one is from 7.5% to 10%. By the way, those reductions I told you about are likely to reduce the VAT revenue by up to 60%.
I mean, it does look like you are taking something and
we're making it progressive.
It looks like a Greek gift. What's it called now? You take something and you start to take more from the Nigerian people.
No, not more.
What is concerning is the hardship that might be imposed on the average person and the poor.
No, but what do you mean by hardship? The average person, for example, does not buy a brand new car. Right?
Okay.
So the average person would want to eat, they want accommodation, they want transportation, they want health, they want education. Once that is covered, any extra amount you have, that's not what poor people spend it on.
Let me, because we need to. So the sharing formula of the VAT collection or the outcome of the revenue in VAT also will be properly readjusted.
Yes.
So who takes more now?
The state and local government will take more.
Okay. What is the percentage proposition?
It's still a proposal. So we are proposing that state and local government will take 90% and the federal government will take 10%. And this is also on the basis that we want the state to discontinue with their consumption tax, entertainment tax, because those taxes. So by the way, our reform is proposing to repeal over 50 different taxes that people pay today that they will no longer have to pay anymore once our reforms are completed. Okay. And that includes those consumption taxes. So that's the plan that we have.
I want us to go through some of the slides that you're prepared. It does look like my own questions I've taken over. So database, that's another problem. People will like to pay, but they want to know whether this touting and this harassment that they always face. Sometimes you don't want to see anybody knock on your door.
Yes.
If your tax payment is done digitally without having to interface with anyone that is giving you a private account, and they will hound you anyway. Is there a database that is being processed right now?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, we think that this way we collect taxes today is quite primitive. We're doing what people did like over 200 years ago. How many countries do you, even in Africa, you see people throw some wood on the road with some nails on them? It's so embarrassing.
The one that is most primitive, and you know why is most primitive, you find it in the city of Abuja. The Amak boys. You will see them literally jumping on your car.
They did it to me actually.
In the middle of the expressway.
I was like, what's going on? Yes, it was my driver that said they wanted to collect tax. I said, on what? He said, because they looked at my car and they assumed it has to be an official car and I needed to pay it. I said, in Abuja, what if I was a foreign investor? It was scary.
Those boys are literally on a spree. They literally become a menace unto themselves because they jump on your vehicle right in the middle in the city centers. And you will see them there, and I'm wondering, what kind of country are we running?
Yeah. So what we have proposed now is for all of those taxes to be consolidated into one. That's the first thing. Second one
is we won't see this out again on the street.
Second one is to outlaw cash payments and roadblocks. So you won't have to pay in cash, and nobody should stop you physically to collect those taxes. We think that will not only make life easy for the Nigerian people, but it would actually increase the amount of those taxes that get to the government. As of last year, according to the MBS, all these taxes collected from over 20 states across Nigeria was less than 50 billion. Can you imagine? So the Nigerian people are paying so much taxes, but it's not getting to the government, making it almost impossible for us to get the reward for paying taxes.
All right. Let me get you to this slide. Although there are fears about the taxes and levies within the petroleum sector, and this has driven a lot of investors out of this country. Is that also in your purview?
Yes, in fact, Mr. President is particularly interested in that and instructed us to look at it.
In the petroleum sector?
Yes, we're looking at it.
There are over 40 taxes and levies.
Same thing with telecommunication. There are just too many taxes in Nigeria. You're going to ask yourself, how did we get here? Yeah, it's burdensome. You say, we spoke to the airlines, and the taxes they pay and levies is more than their margin.
Let's get you to... I wish that all of this, you can run through this in a few minutes.
Yeah.
And so your first slide talks about the exclusive legislative list. And what exactly are you looking at? You've listed about 22 items there.
Yeah, so the idea of this is because there has been a lot of talks recently around a new constitution. And the reasons that people gave for it range from, it is not we the people, to things like, fiscal federalism, give more to the state and all of that, And they would also say exclusive legislative list has 68 items versus concurrent list of, so I thought it would be good to put it in proper perspective. Yeah. Like the point you made, we're not very respectful of data in Nigeria, sadly.
Yeah.
And so most time when we make policies, they don't derive the outcomes that we expect. So on that, first page I just listed the 68 items under the exclusive legislative list. And I thought it's important to make the point first and foremost that list does not belong to the federal government. It only means these are the areas where the National Assembly can legislate. And the National Assembly is not the legislature of the federal government, it's the legislature of the federation. Yeah. So the second point there is to then look at the list
of... Are you altering any part of it?
Yes, some of these.
Are you removing some of these to take to the concurrent so that the state also can legislate on them?
Yes, so we've seen areas where there are a bit of overlaps, and then we've recommended where it should be so there's clarity, right? And then if you look at the concurrent, you would also see what is there. But the one that is even most interesting is the fourth schedule, where you have the local government, now that they have the autonomy, and you see the roles that they should play. From providing homes for destitutes into things like, licensing of bicycles and trucks, construction and maintenance of roads, street naming, numbering of houses, conveniences, sewage, refuse disposal, and goes on and on. One point we want to make here is that for some reasons, we've assumed as a country that if a government has the power to regulate and control something, then it must collect a tax. We think otherwise. The law is just saying you can regulate and control, right? Licenses of bicycle, trucks, wheelbarrow, but we're collecting wheelbarrow levies and bicycle levy. Those are poor people. So we've proposed for those ones to also be changed. Yes. And we also have a recommendation for government across all levels to prioritize spending on the areas that will help reduce multidimensional poverty, including education, including health, standard of living, work, and security. So we've done that. Now,
it's a major readjustment.
Yes.
So
major readjustment.
You're talking about fiscal structure of major revenues.
Yes.
And all the resources.
Yes. So this is one area that people, I'm not sure I've heard anyone who has gotten it right. So I thought it would be good to educate ourselves. So in Nigeria, there's this talk about federal government is too powerful, they take too much revenue. It's 52 point something, but that's not what it is. So I thought I should explain that. So there are about 8 major areas where revenues come from. And 5 of that are exclusively almost 100% belonging to states. One is personal income tax. The second one is property tax. The third one is stamp duties. The next one is value-added tax. And that's interesting, right? Value-added tax, today the federal government takes 15%. But that's about the amount generated by the FCT. So really, the federal government is not taking anything, right? Which means 100% of VAT goes to states. And then you have land. Land in Nigeria belongs to the states. In the United States, the data we got is that states have less than 10% of the land in the US. Personal income tax in the US is collected by both federal and states. So if you look at these 5 resources that belong to the states, then the remaining 3 are shared. Number 1 is corporate income tax. The second one is custom duties. And then you have petroleum revenue and solid minerals. These ones are shared. And even when they're shared, the federal government does not get up to 52 point something percent. Last year, total FAC was a little over 10 trillion, and the federal government got 3.99, which is less than 40%. Why is that? It's because before you even start sharing, you give 13% derivation to some states. So by the time you look at the effective, if you have 8 sources of income, 5 belong to states exclusively, and on the other 3, they collect 60%. You see that actually...
Yeah, the state adds more.
Exactly. Yeah. So the conversation we should be having is how can the state become more efficient?
Attention, in the utilization of these taxes.
Yes, and we want to discourage Nigerians from asking state and local government to become creative with IGR, because they always misinterpret it to mean introduce a new tax. We don't want them to be creative. They should collect a few taxes and collect it efficiently and use it for the benefit of the people.
Properly.
Absolutely.
We have just about a minute or there, but I don't know how we want to run through the rest. Is there a way you can...
I can try.
Be a magician.
Yes, I'll try. I think the other one is really just speaking to the size of the budget, which I said is small. This is even less than 1/4 of South African budget. It's about the size of the budget for Kenya. What is even lower than that is the revenue.
We could do better.
We could do much better.
For 2025, how far do you think you can go in terms of...
I don't know. I don't want to commit the government. We're speaking with the budget office. In fact, we have a retreat on Thursday with the Ministry of Budget and Economic Planning. We're going to be discussing that, but we expect it should be significantly more as we get into our reform. So if you look at these information about taxes, Nigeria collected 1.5 trillion in personal income tax last year. The same year, Kenya collected 5.8 trillion naira. South Africa collected 50.5 trillion naira.
And we have more people.
We have far more people. In fact, if we assume that we have so many poor people, I would argue that our top 60 million people are not poorer than the average South African, which is their population. So imagine that. So which means, and these countries have higher threshold for exemption. So in South Africa, you don't pay personal income tax on up to about 600,000 naira a month. In Kenya, about 280,000 naira a month, you will not pay tax. But guess what? In Nigeria, with 30,000, you start paying personal income tax. So we're just taxing the poorest people. That's why the numbers are not looking good the way they should look. So it shows the opportunity for improvement and the need for us to do all of that sooner rather than later. I think, on the last slide, because I know because of time, is where we have the multidimensional poverty index calculation. And we've been having this conversation with our leaders, including the governors, as well as the president, the ministers, finance commissioners, to say these are the areas we need to prioritize our spending to be able to leave the Nigerian people out of poverty. I think that is the primary purpose of government.
Taiwo Oyedele, I wish you and your team the very best. We'll be looking forward to how we can be more decisive and yet more productive. Because that is what it is. If we can be more data and digital driven in the collection and the aggregation of these revenues, it will be very important.
With transparency and accountability as to how they are being spent.
Absolutely.
Yes.
I mean, Nigerians are very, very patriotic people.
Yes.
If they know that the right thing is being done, they will also respond in like manner.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Taiwo Oyedele.
Thank you for having me.
Best in your job. Thank you so much. Taiwo Oyedele is a chairman of the Presidential Special Committee on Tax Reforms here in Nigeria.